Hey everyone, 99% of you watching aren't subscribed. Let's change that. Hit that subscribe button, and at 1,000 subscribers, we'll drop special stories just for you.
The aliens had crossed 12 star systems to reach Earth. Their vessel, the Veilthur, did not travel in the crude manner of chemical propulsion or even gravitational slingshotting. It folded space gently, like pressing two distant fingerprints together until they touched. To the inhabitants of Earth, the ship did not exist. Light curved around it. Radar slipped past it. Even chance glanced away. Inside the living hull, 3 observers stood within a sphere of shifting holographic light. Serial, primary xenobiologist, adjusted the atmospheric filters around her elongated neck. Oxygen-rich world. Nitrogen dominant. Surface temperature variable but survivable. Torvac, tactical analyst, study behavioral projections streaming through layered displays. Civilization fragmented into multiple governing factions. Internal conflict persistent. Technological development accelerating. The third Veiler, the mission arbiter, remained silent, watching Earth rotate beneath them in a shimmering projection. Humanity had fascinated them. The broadcasts alone were a contradiction. Orchestral symphonies followed by battlefield footage. Medical breakthroughs beside viral videos of reckless stunts. The species displayed empathy and cruelty in nearly equal measure. They wept openly yet engineered weapons capable of planetary extinction. Unstable, promising, potentially dangerous. Direct large-scale contact inadvisable. Veiler finally concluded. Select isolated subject for behavioral sampling. They searched rural regions, low population density, minimal surveillance, less chance of mass panic, less chance of military response. They found him near the agricultural grids of a continent labeled North America. Daniel Reyes, age 34, occupation, cattle rancher, no military record, no violent criminal history, moderate stress levels, elevated resilience markers. Physically average by planetary standards. Suitable, serial confirmed. The abduction field activated without sound. Daniel had always liked the quiet of midnight. The fence line ran along the western pasture, wooden posts leaning slightly from years of weather. The cattle had grown restless earlier. Something spooked them, probably coyotes, or thunder rolling in from distant hills. He wiped sweat from his brow and tested the tension on a new length of wire. The air felt thick, not humid, heavy. He paused. The night insects had stopped. Daniel straightened slowly, instincts prickling before his thoughts caught up. The sky above the pasture shimmered faintly, as if heat rose from an invisible fire. What the... Light swallowed him. It wasn't a beam. It wasn't a flash. It was as if the world folded inward, and he fell through the crease. He landed on solid ground, but it wasn't grass. The floor beneath him was smooth, metallic, faintly warm. The air smelled sterile, tinged with something sharp. Ozone and metal. Daniel staggered upright. The chamber curved in all directions, no visible seams. Pale blue light pulsed from the walls in rhythmic waves. Panels shifted silently as if alive. And then he saw them. 3 figures stood across the chamber. Tall, at least 7 feet. Limbs slender but proportionally strong. Skin like polished stone with faint bioluminescent veins pulsing beneath the surface. Their eyes were large, lidless, and reflective, catching every flicker of light. They did not blink. They did not breathe, at least not in any way he recognized. Daniel's heart slammed against his ribs. "This ain't real," he whispered. One of the beings tilted its head. A vibration hummed through the air. Daniel felt it in his teeth more than heard it. The alien scanned him. Invisible fields passed over his body, mapping tissue density, skeletal structure, neural patterns. A projection formed between them. A rotating image of Daniel's anatomy layered in color-coded analysis. Musculature density within predicted parameters. Serial said in her harmonic language. Bone composition calcium dominant. Structural durability limited. Cranial activity heightened. Torvac added. Adrenal response significant. Daniel turned slowly, trying to understand the room. No doors. No windows. No obvious exits. He raised his hands instinctively. "Look," he said, voice shaking but steadying with effort. "I don't know what's going on, but I got work in the morning." The aliens recorded the sound wave. The translator algorithms struggled. Human language patterns were chaotic, compared to their structure harmonic speech. Vocal emissions complex, Serial observed. Emotional resonance detectable. Daniel took a step backward. The wall behind him shimmered, but did not yield. He was trapped. The beings approached, movement smooth and controlled. No wasted motion. No sign of aggression, yet no sign of empathy either. To them, he was data. To him, they were monsters. A platform extended silently from the wall beside him, carrying several objects laid out with precision. His wallet, his phone, his boots. He hadn't even realized they were gone. And there, his pocket knife, the familiar wooden handle, the small, dependable blade he'd carried since he was 16. The aliens did not react to the items. To them, these were inert possessions cataloged during retrieval. To Daniel, the knife was something else entirely. It meant leverage, control, choice. Subject gaze fixation detected. Torvac noted. Daniel's breathing slowed. Fear shifted. It didn't disappear, but it hardened. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a hero, but he had grown up fixing machinery with baling wire and duct tape. He had calmed panicked animals twice his size. He had once wrestled a feral hog off his property with nothing but grit and a broken shovel handle. You don't survive long in the countryside by freezing. His hand twitched. The aliens continued their scan. Threat probability minimal, Torvac concluded. Subject lacks natural weapons. Daniel's fingers closed around the knife. And in that instant, the aliens realized their models were incomplete. The moment Daniel's fingers closed around the knife, the chamber changed. It wasn't visible at first. No alarms blared. No lights flashed red. But the air tightened. To the aliens, the shift was immediate and profound. Their instruments registered microvariations in muscle fiber contraction, a surge in adrenal hormones, a sudden stabilization of motor tremors. The human's erratic fear response had condensed into something focused, directed, object classified, edged implement, Serial said, her voice rippling through harmonic bands. Primitive construction, metallic blade, organic grip. Daniel pulled the knife from the tray and flicked it open in one fluid motion. The metallic snap echoed sharply in the smooth chamber. The aliens flinched. They had studied human weapons in abstraction, war footage, archived military databases, simulations of projectile arms. But those were distant things, collective things. This was different. This was personal. Daniel didn't rush them. He didn't scream. He simply stepped back, shoulders squared, knife angled outward. The blade caught the pale chamber light and reflected it in a thin silver line. "Okay," he said, voice lower now. "Steadier. Nobody move." The translator field struggled, parsing tone before vocabulary. The words were lost, but intent was not. Vocal frequencies shift. Torvac observed. Confidence increased. Fear reduced. "Correction," Serial said softly. Fear redirected. Daniel's heart still pounded, but it no longer felt chaotic. His body had chosen path. Fight! His gaze locked onto the nearest alien. They were taller, yes, limbs longer, but thin, delicate, almost. He'd faced down a charging bull once. You didn't win by overpowering it. You won by committing faster than expected. The aliens adjusted their distance by half a step. It was subtle. Daniel noticed. "You understand that?" he muttered. "Yeah, you get it." Inside the Veilther, predictive models recalculated. Subject demonstrating territorial defense posture, Torvac said, implies awareness of vulnerability yet willingness to engage regardless. "In our records," Serial replied, "individuals confronted with superior entities exhibit submission behaviors." Daniel took a deliberate step forward. The alien stepped back. Silence deepened. In their civilization, tools were extensions of collective effort. Cutting instruments existed, yes, but only in controlled industrial environments. No being carried a blade for personal defense. Violence had been engineered out of daily life generations ago. The concept of an individual instantly integrating a weapon into their identity. It unsettled them. Daniel shifted his grip slightly, testing the balance. He didn't know their anatomy, didn't know where it would hurt most, but he knew this. Anything that bleeds can be convinced. Subject advancing, Torvak said. Barrier recommended. Cyril answered. Negative. Vaylor interjected for the first time since the escalation. Observe further. Daniel's eyes flicked around the chamber, scanning. No visible doors. No obvious weaknesses. But he saw faint seams in the walls, panels that emitted stronger light. Control points. He angled his body slightly, not directly facing them anymore. The aliens noticed. Postural realignment. Torvak said. Subject not solely focused on direct attack. Daniel exhaled slowly. He feinted left. One alien reacted instantly, shifting its weight. Got you, Daniel thought. He lunged, not toward the alien, but toward the glowing panel embedded in the wall. The aliens hesitated for a fraction of a second. It was enough. The knife slashed across the surface of the panel. Sparks erupted as metal met alien alloy. The blade screeched, leaving a jagged groove. The chamber lights flickered. Systems disturbance detected. Cyril's tone sharpened. Daniel didn't stop. He stabbed again, this time with both hands driving the blade forward. The panel cracked with a brittle snap, fracture spidering outward in luminous lines. Gravity wavered. Daniel staggered as the floor tilted slightly, then snapped level again. The aliens moved now, faster than before. One extended a limb, and a translucent barrier shimmered between them and the human. Daniel spun and slashed at it instinctively. The knife struck the barrier with a burst of white sparks. The impact vibrated up his arm, nearly numbing his fingers. He gritted his teeth and pulled back. The barrier wasn't solid. Not exactly. It rippled like liquid glass. He circled. The aliens held position behind the shield, watching him with wide, unblinking eyes. Subject exhibits adaptive aggression. Torvak said. Target selection strategic. He did not strike at us directly, Cyril added. He attacked environmental infrastructure. Daniel's breathing came in controlled bursts now. His fear had narrowed into a blade as sharp as the one in his hand. He wasn't thinking about aliens. He was thinking about escape. The barrier flickered faintly, the damaged panel still interfering. Daniel noticed. He hurled the knife without warning, not at the aliens, at the same cracked panel. The blade spun end over end and buried itself in the fractured seam. The chamber lights died for half a second. The barrier faltered. In that sliver of darkness, the aliens understood something that no broadcast had fully conveyed. Humans did not need natural weapons. They made them, and when cornered, they used them without hesitation. The lights surged back on. Daniel dove forward, reaching for the knife lodged in the panel as gravity lurched violently to one side. Behind the barrier, for the first time in their recorded history of exploration, the observers felt fear. When the lights surged back, they did not stabilize. They pulsed, dim bright, dim again, like a failing heartbeat. Daniel hit the floor hard as gravity skewed 30 degrees to the right. The smooth metallic surface offered no traction. He slid, boots scraping uselessly, and slammed into the curved wall. Somewhere above him, the knife dislodged in the cracked panel and clattered across the chamber. Gravitational regulators destabilized, Cyril reported, her voice fracturing through interference. Damage localized but cascading. Torvak extended both arms. A lattice of translucent geometry unfolded from his limbs, anchoring him to the floor. The other two observers followed suit, stabilizing themselves with controlled magnetic adhesion. Daniel didn't have that option. He clawed forward as gravity shifted again, this time downward, then sideways, then briefly vanishing altogether. For half a second, he floated. In that weightless instant, he saw the aliens clearly, no longer serene, no longer purely analytical. They were reacting. Contain the subject, Torvak ordered. A beam of pale light snapped toward Daniel. He twisted midair on instinct. The beam grazed his shoulder, and sudden numbness spread through his arm like liquid ice. He hit the floor as gravity returned violently, driving the air from his lungs. The knife skittered across the chamber, coming to rest near the faltering barrier generator. Daniel coughed, forcing himself up. Pain meant he was still conscious, still moving. Neuromuscular disruption at 40%, Serial said. Increase output? Negative. Vela replied sharply. Observe adaptive threshold. Even now, they were studying him. Rage flared through Daniel hotter than fear ever had. He staggered toward the knife as the chamber tilted again. His boots left streaks across the metallic surface. Another pulse of light shot toward him. He grabbed the knife and rolled. The beam struck the wall behind him, carving a glowing line into the alloy. Daniel came up on one knee, knife in hand. The barrier flickered between them, unstable. He could see through it now, barely. The aliens' luminous veins pulsed faster, their internal light shifting towards sharp whites instead of calm blues. He didn't know what that meant, but it looked stressed. The floor lurched upward without warning. Daniel jumped, not away, but forward. The barrier destabilized at that exact moment, collapsing inward in a spray of refracted light. Daniel burst through the fading field and drove the knife forward. He wasn't aiming for a heart. He didn't know where that would be. He aimed for connection points, where limb met torso, where light pulsed brightest beneath the skin. The blade pierced. Resistance gave way with a strange, elastic sensation. Torvac recoiled sharply. A thin arc of luminous fluid sprayed into the air. Not red, not blue, but a radiant silver gold that shimmered as it drifted. The chamber went silent. The beam weapons powered down automatically. Daniel stumbled backward, knife still raised. Torvac stared at the wound along his forearm. The cut was shallow by human standards, but luminous fluid leaked steadily, drifting upward in defiance of gravity before evaporating into sparks. Structural breach, Torvac said quietly. Serial stared at the floating droplets. Pain response confirmed. For their species, injury was nearly obsolete. Their biology had been engineered for durability. Conflict resolution had long ago replaced physical confrontation. To bleed, because of a single organic creature from a pre-interstellar world. It shattered assumptions. Daniel's chest heaved. His arm still tingled from the beam strike, but adrenaline drowned most of the numbness. He didn't press the advantage immediately. He waited. Predators knew something about that pause, the moment when both sides reassessed. The chamber system struggled to recalibrate. The cracked panel continued emitting erratic pulses. Displays flickered. Somewhere deeper in the vessel, a low alarm began to hum. Not loud, but persistent. Vaylor stepped forward slightly, though not in aggression. Reevaluation, Vaylor said. Serial's eyes never left Daniel. Subject exhibits rapid tactical adaptation. Environmental manipulation effective. Pain infliction capability verified. Daniel didn't understand the words, but he understood tone. They weren't advancing. They were hesitating. He shifted his stance again, not wild, not reckless. Measured. He angled himself so he stood between them and the damaged panel, knife steady despite the tremor in his muscles. The alien's internal projections updated in real time. Human muscle fibers compensating for partial neural inhibition. Cognitive processing accelerating under stress. Decision-making not degraded by fear, but sharpened. Individual lethality underestimated by a factor of 8, Torvac admitted. Daniel's eyes flicked briefly toward the wall, toward the faint outline of what might be an exit seam. He saw it now, a barely perceptible vertical line, where two surfaces met. Door. He didn't know if it would open, but he knew he needed leverage. Without warning, he charged, not at Torvac, but at Serial, who stood slightly closer to the seam. It wasn't a clean strike. It was messy, desperate, human. The knife slashed across Serial's side. Not deep enough to disable, but enough to tear luminous flesh. More silver-gold fluid scattered into the air. This time, the aliens did not recoil in confusion. They recoiled in alarm. Multiple containment systems activated at once, overlapping fields flickering around Daniel. The gravity normalized abruptly, slamming everything into equilibrium. Daniel was thrown backward by a kinetic pulse and crashed against the curved wall near the seam. The knife nearly slipped from his grasp. He forced himself up again. The alien stood several paces away now. Both wounded, luminous fluid sealing slowly over their cuts as accelerated regeneration engaged. They could heal, but not instantly, and not without cost. The chamber light stabilized into a colder hue. The observers were no longer treating this as a specimen interaction. This was now a live threat scenario. Vaylor's voice carried a new weight. Conclusion: escalation risk unacceptable. Cyril looked at Daniel, not as an animal, not as data, as a variable capable of destabilizing more than a single room. Daniel leaned against the wall, knife trembling in his grip. He was exhausted. He was terrified, but he was still standing. And that fact, more than the wounds, forced the aliens to recalibrate everything they believed about humanity. The chamber no longer felt like a laboratory. It felt like a standoff. Daniel stood with his back near the faint seeming wall, knife raised despite the tremor running through his arm. His shoulder throbbed where the beam had grazed him. Sweat stung his eyes. Every breath scraped his throat raw. Across from him, the three aliens had widened their formation, not encircling him now, but spacing themselves defensively. They were no longer curious. They were cautious. Torvak's wounded arm shimmered as luminous tissue slowly knitted itself together. The silver-gold fluid that had spilled onto the floor evaporated into faint sparks, absorbed by unseen systems. Regeneration progressing, Torvak said, voice steadier but subdued. Subject fatigue increasing, Cyril observed. Motor tremor at 12%. Vaylor's gaze never left Daniel. Yet posture remained combative. Daniel didn't know what they were saying, but he knew that look. He'd seen it in wild animals cornered against fencing. Not hatred. Assessment. He tightened his grip. Come on, he muttered hoarsely. Let's finish it. At the word finish, his voice cracked, not with fear, but with something rawer. The aliens registered it. Emotional intensity spike. Cortisol high. Adrenaline peaking. Muscular endurance approaching threshold. And still, he advanced half a step. Vaylor made a decision. The chamber lights dimmed, not in failure, but in design. The curved wall behind Daniel dissolved into a projection. Earth appeared between them, a luminous sphere rotating slowly in the air. Daniel froze despite himself. Clouds swirled over blue oceans. City lights glittered along darkened continents. The image sharpened, zooming inward. Skyscrapers, highways, ports, military bases. Daniel swallowed. What are you? The projection shifted again. Humans in camouflage carrying rifles. Naval fleets cutting through open water. Fighter jets screaming across the sky. Then mushroom clouds. Daniel's breath hitched. The aliens overlaid simulations. Probability models branching outward in luminous fractals. One human with a knife. Localized threat. Millions of humans unified under fear or rage. Exponential escalation. Collective capability catastrophic. Cyril said quietly. Torvak looked at Daniel, not at the blade now, but at the defiance in his posture. Subject demonstrates willingness to inflict harm despite technological disparity. Multiply by planetary population, Vaylor finished. Daniel's eyes moved between the images and the beings before him. You've been watching us, he said under his breath. The projection shifted again, showing not war this time, but construction. Engineers assembling bridges. Doctors in operating rooms. Firefighters running into burning buildings. Then back to conflict. Creation and destruction, interwoven. Daniel understood the implication. You don't want this. The knife lowered an inch. Not in surrender. In comprehension. The alien saw it immediately. Hostility intensity decreasing, Torvak said. No, Cyril corrected. Redirecting. Daniel's mind raced. They weren't killing him. They weren't even attacking anymore. They were reconsidering. He thought about his ranch, his neighbors, his niece who thought aliens were probably friendly. He thought about governments panicking, missiles launching at the first confirmed sighting. This wasn't a movie. If these things showed themselves openly, people would fight hard. And humanity was very, very good at fighting. Vaylor raised one elongated limb. The projection dissolved. The scene behind Daniel brightened. The floor beneath his boots shifted, softened, transformed into a luminous plane. Daniel's pulse spiked again. Non-lethal release protocol, Vaylor said. The light swallowed Daniel a second time. He dropped barely a foot, landing hard on damp grass. The sudden cold of night air hit him like a shockwave. Crickets chirped. Wind rustled through the pasture fence he'd been repairing. For a moment, he stayed crouched, knife still raised. The sky above shimmered faintly, like heat distortion over asphalt. Then nothing. No sound of engines. No streak across the stars. Just an empty stretch of Texas sky. Daniel stood slowly. His shoulders still hurt. His clothes were scorched where the beam had grazed him. The knife trembled in his grip. It hadn't been a dream. Above the planet, far beyond visible atmosphere, the Veilther folded space once more. Inside, silence lingered. Torvak flexed his healed arm, examining the faint scar that remained, a rarity among their kind. Permanent tissue variants, he said quietly. Serial recorded the final assessment. Species designation, human, adaptive aggression high. Tool, integration instinctive. Emotional states convertible to tactical advantage. Vaylor watched Earth recede in the viewing sphere. Initial objective, passive study. He paused. Revised directive, distant observation only. Avoid provocation. Delay direct contact until collective psychological models improve. Serial added one final notation to the crystalline archive. A single unenhanced human, isolated and technologically outmatched, inflicted damage and destabilized vessel systems within minutes. Torvak looked once more at the rotating image of Earth. If threatened collectively, he said, their response curve suggests escalation beyond containment. Vaylor dimmed the projection. Then we will not threaten them. The ship vanished into folded space. Back on his ranch, Daniel finally lowered the knife. He stared at the blade, at the faint, strange residue that evaporated from its edge like mist. He looked up at the stars. His voice was quiet but firm. Yeah, he said. Don't come back.